Thank you for coming back to the Nest Summit. Today, we're talking about innovations and advancements in climate-related scoring products. We're joined by Todd Bridges from Arabesque. Todd, welcome to the Nest Summit.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to chat.
So you've come out with a very innovative product that we've been tracking for a while called S-Ray, and your heat-related scores related to S-Ray. Can you give the audience a little bit of a sense of what S-Ray is and how you're trying to adapt climate risk into the S-Ray data scores?
Yeah, absolutely. So our recent advancements in new scoring systems is the S-Ray temperature score. It really tries to crystallize and make sense of some of the key fundamental problems that many asset owners, asset managers, and corporations are trying to address and wrap their heads around, right? Many have heard about the Paris Agreement, the TCFD, or the IPCC, or the IEA scenario analysis, but those are really foreign outside objects, such as a policy or climate science scenario analysis. What we wanted to do is take an attempt at doing most of the heavy lifting, both on the data side and the research analytics side, to create a score that makes sense, that's allowing users to move into decision useful strategic asset allocations, or for the case of the corporation, to make policies, internal policies that could really move the needle towards those big, huge policy objectives or climate science targets. And so the temperature score does that. It collects data for thousands of global corporations and captures their scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, creates a series of computational metrics such as the carbon intensity parameter, and then we project that into a series of scenario analysis by the IEA, for example, at 2030 and 2050. Instantly, what the user gets, or what the asset owner, asset manager, or corporation gets, is a series of outputs that they can feed into their investment process and hopefully make strategic asset allocations to be aligned with the 1 degree or 1.5 degree scenario, 2 degree, 2.5, or 2.7. We also have a 3 degree scenario whereby it is given predominantly to companies who don't even report on the climate data, or scope 1, 2, or 3. So again, it's a latest score that helps users, in this case, mostly institutional investors, start to make sense of big policies and scenarios that are projected to be and puts the carbon emissions pathway into perspective.
Todd, thank you for explaining that. The field, at least in the asset management and wealth management industry, has been trying to absorb ESG data for a while, and certainly S-Ray has been a thought leader on that data set. When you look at climate risk data, which is really separate and distinct from ESG data, do you think that there's more standardization around climate data, and how do some of the recent frameworks that are coming out help in that process?
Yeah, brilliant. As you know, and most of the veterans who are listening to this know, we've had a long struggle to try to gain kind of trust, legitimacy by the core financial markets. What is ESG and capturing ESG data? That is a very complicated and messy subject. For environmental data, it's a little bit more cut and dry. And so it is, a scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 parameter. What types of embedded fossil fuel reserves do you have? So on an empirical side, it's a little bit easier to measure, which is great. And again, beyond just the data, uniqueness of the environmental or climate data, the regulations are much clearer on these parameters. And so the European Commission, through the technical expert group and a series of new regulations that will be taking place throughout the European markets, will put greater regularity on, classifying sustainable investing and in particular environmental products. So, for example, the SFDR, which is the new regulation that will be going into effect as of March of next year throughout the European Union, will clearly specify approximately 50 indicators or metrics, most of them being around the environmental parameters that every asset manager in the European Union will have to report on or against within their investment portfolio. some of that new taxonomy by the European Commission is also clearly defining what would be a climate change mitigation or climate change adaptation, right? So in the future, when asset managers create new products, whether it's a fund of some structure, vehicle structure, or an ETF, they will need to make reference to climate change mitigation or climate change adaptation if that was the objective of the fund. So now, again, with respect to taxonomy and also with respect to metrics, we are starting to get much greater regularity and standardization, and this will help the markets on products and then also on data.
So Todd, moving along in that process, what are the integration objectives for climate risk analysis that you're doing with SRA?
Yeah, wonderful. So we're working both internally on our own designs, but also with clients around the world to help them in their assessment of how to integrate climate data. Again, there are many reasons one would, or the asset owner or asset manager in this case, would want to integrate. Of course, they are thinking about ways to decarbonize the portfolio, such that if and when we start to move to a low carbon or a green economy, will you be decarbonizing the portfolio appropriately? Will you keep an eye on these transition risks that as we move to a low carbon based economy, it might take us 5 to 10 years. And so you'll want to slowly manage the risk that's associated with decarbonization and the transition pathways. You also want to keep an eye within the portfolio about potential physical risks, such that they will be happening at a much greater regularity. Typhoons, droughts, what part of the portfolios will be impacted by those. And then some asset owners, some asset managers are already at a policy level trying to indicate that they want to be 1.5 or 2 degree scenario aligned at the portfolio, which again, it's an ambitious objective. But at the portfolio level, there's a series of techniques that you can align your equity or fixed income portfolio with the 1.5 or 2 degree scenario. So there's a lot of reasons that we have been integrating climate data. We're helping clients on their pathway, and these techniques, I'd love to share with you as well.
Please give us some examples of the portfolio level techniques of the climate related investment strategies for our audience.
Yeah, again, for you, I believe you probably know most of these, but let me just articulate a few. For example, that if you were going to, objective is to decarbonize the portfolio, one could very well implement that through a series of techniques such as a screening or negative screening, if you will, in particular, or perhaps taking the fossil fuel out of the portfolio. So you can very well do that with a heavy hand, right? So you can strip out all fossil fuels, or it's probably best and more risk efficient and a better risk management technique to slowly start to pull out of these positions with a 10, 15, 20% decarbonization of the portfolio, and slowly move all of your equity portfolios away from that over time. That's the negative screening, of course, we all know that. There's a lot more advancements being made with integration, right? Full ESG integration, or in this case, climate integration. This is where you would want to start playing within the portfolio in the universe security selection to either, again, manage the downside risk so that you start to decrease companies from the universe, but now also start to select the companies who are doing much better on a parameter, such as carbon intensity, a weighted carbon intensity, for example. So now you're starting to make sure that those companies that are moving in the right direction, still on a carbon parameter, if you will, are included, or you perhaps oversample on that parameter. Then, of course, for those who are a little bit more, have universal buy-in on the climate and integration techniques, then you start reweighting some of the portfolio parameters, such as you take a beta portfolio and start to place greater and greater weights on those companies that are moving into the low carbon economy or the green revenue sectors, if you will, and place greater weights on those in the ultimate portfolio that you're designing. All of these techniques can be used in parallel with traditional financial integration techniques, right? Such that you would want to always keep track of, as you're decarbonizing the portfolio, as you minimize the carbon intensity, if you will, you're also always keeping an eye on the risk parameter, right? That could be your standard deviation, your Sereno, Sharpe ratio, a series of other parameters, so that you always want to make sure that your climate objectives, if you will, and the techniques you're using to achieve those climate objectives does not interfere with the traditional financial parameter that you want to ensure. So those are many techniques we can keep diving into, but at a high level and some particulars, those are the objectives and how to achieve it at the portfolio with certain techniques.
Todd, thank you for that. Can you speak to the people that are out in the audience that, especially even advisors, that have really been shunning even adopting ESG as a strategy for portfolio selection and now have to deal with a second layer of data around climate change and climate risk? Couldn't you just speak to them about why it's urgent and what you're seeing, certainly at the institutional level, versus what you're seeing in the just wealth management and advisor community?
Yeah, there's a number of recommendations I always like to suggest is that, we will see increasing regulation on these parameters, right? So it's no longer because we think that it's going to affect the better risk return profile. Again, that is critical and very important for a certain audience, but those who are not perhaps convinced of that argument, I do want to just make sure that we know that the regulations are coming, right? Throughout the European Union, they start to come in 2021, and it's starting to come at an increasing rate. So on how you design products, on how you design indices, on how you report on these parameters across every financial entity, if you will, or financial advisor firm. And that's just in the European Union. There's a series of new regulations coming online within the APAC region, China, and of course the Canadian market, and regulators are making progress as well. The US context within the current administration perhaps is not going to be a thought leader on the climate regulation parameter or ESG integration, but these are things that one needs to be aware of. So the regulation is huge. I can't emphasize that. We've kind of missed that, and we've now reached a critical point where regulation will be coming at an increasing rate. Within the financial sector, it's also important to point out, for those who understand the fiduciary duty and the fiduciary responsibility, there's increasing awareness of this, that this may be one other parameter whereby you would want to take it into account on your traditional investment practices, right? Whether this is any rational investor wishes to take in this new information called ESG or climate data, there's a growing consensus that many asset owners, asset managers are believing this is within the fiduciary duty. And then final parameter is that, I would say that the quality of data is getting much better. It's not perfect, but we're at a stage in 2020 and soon to be 2021 where the quality of that data is soon to be as high quality as that of the financial markets, right? And so you can put greater trust into the data and integration techniques that you're designing and building.
Todd, I want to thank you and Arabesque for joining us at the Nest Summit and for the great work that you're doing around climate risk. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, my pleasure.